All right, we come to the fourth of 8 leading ladies of the Word from the New Testament, and it's our third consecutive Mary. As you have guessed by now, there are a lot of Marys in the New Testament, and 3 of them are part of this series. Mary was the most common name for Jewish women, Jewish girls in the first century. And so that's why we've had 3 straight: Mary, the mother of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and now we will look at the Mary of Clopas, who is mentioned just one time in the Bible, but by putting some puzzle pieces together, it's possible we know a lot more about this Mary than just that one verse would tell us. That one verse is John 19:25. It says, "Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene." Now we've already addressed in this series Jesus' mother, and we've already looked at Mary Magdalene, but we have in the middle of those 2 women his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and there's some debate: is that 2 women or is that 1? Is his mother's sister named Mary, and she happens to be the wife of Clopas, so it's just one person, or is this 2 different people? Well, I believe that it's actually the same person, that Jesus' mother was there, and then Mary's sister, I think it's actually a sister-in-law, that happens to also be called Mary, and she is identified as the wife of Clopas. And then there's Mary Magdalene. So that's who we're going to focus on, is Mary, the wife of Clopas, who I believe was a sister-in-law to Mary, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But what we can learn from this passage is that whoever Mary of Clopas was, she was a follower of Jesus, and she was watching the events of the cross with Mary, the mother, and Mary Magdalene. So she was likely, almost certainly, a disciple of Jesus, who was part of this entourage of women that were disciples of Jesus. Richard Bauckham says in his book Gospel Women that when read in the light of other relevant evidence, this verse will prove capable of yielding a surprising amount of reliable historical information about this woman. It says, "We know that the successor to James, the Lord's brother, as head of the Jerusalem church, was Simon, or Simeon, the son of Clopas. And this Clopas was the brother of Jesus' putative father Joseph." Now let me explain this a little bit. So I mentioned in the video we did on Mary, the mother of Jesus, that Mary and Joseph's son James became the first leader of the church in Jerusalem in the early history of Christianity. Well, when he was martyred, the one who took over for him was a man named Simon, son of Clopas. And as we'll see in this next quote, that this Clopas, the brother of Joseph, is the same person as the Clopas of John 19:25, can be considered certain because the name Clopas is extremely rare. So there's a really strong possibility that Clopas and Joseph were brothers. And so Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Mary, the wife of Clopas, would have been sisters-in-law. And so they were related through marriage. And then we have this quote from Richard Bauckham: "If Mary's Clopas," and this is just kind of a fun quote, "if Mary's Clopas was Joseph's brother, she can hardly have been his mother. She was most likely the wife of Clopas," because the word just says "of Clopas." So we're trying to decide if she's the wife of Clopas or if she's the, another relation to Clopas. But Mary of Clopas, who was in fact Jesus' mother's husband's brother's wife. Now I just love how scholars are so technical in their alignment. Well, he could have just as easily said that Mary of Clopas was sister-in-law to Mary, the mother of Jesus. But instead he says Mary of Clopas, who was in fact Jesus' mother's husband's brother's wife, could well be described as Jesus' mother's sister. And that's because you often refer, even in our day, to sister-in-laws as our sisters. Thus, it is entirely possible that, like his son, Clopas was known by both his Semitic name and by a Greek equivalent, Cleopas. and that he is the same person as the Cleopas of Luke 24:18 is rendered probable by the consideration that the latter must have been a disciple of Jesus sufficiently known in the early church for his name to have been preserved in the tradition. So you might not know where Richard Bauckham's going here, but there's a passage in the resurrection accounts of Jesus, the appearances of Jesus, where Jesus appears with two disciples on the road to Emmaus, and one of them is called Cleopas. And what Bauckham is saying here is that Cleopas is just a variation of Clopas, and so those two disciples on the road to Emmaus that Jesus met with and talked with for quite a long time, that there's a great chance that this is the couple, Clopas and Mary. And so Jesus appeared to Mary and Clopas on the road to Emmaus. So he concludes that both Clopas and his wife Mary were disciples of Jesus who traveled with him from Galilee on his final journey to Jerusalem and subsequently became prominent members of the early Jewish Christian community in Palestine, and that's why their son went on to be the second leader of the church. Simon of Clopas went on to be the second leader of the church in Jerusalem. Now, if all that's true, that's somewhat speculative. It's Richard Bauckham putting together a bunch of different pieces of information, almost like a puzzle, and saying that we can connect the Mary of Clopas that's mentioned in John 19. We can connect her to the Clopas family, who were leaders in the early church, and we can even connect them back to the two disciples on the road to Emmaus that Jesus appeared to. That's, I think, historically plausible. And if it's true, then we have with Mary of Clopas a woman who was a follower of Jesus, who was at the cross, who was a witness to the resurrection appearance, and who, along with her family, played an important role in the early church. That same day, just to read the account of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus, that same day, two of them were going to the village called Emmaus. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened, and one of them named Cleopas. So here's a depiction of Jesus with the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. This is a piece of art, and you can see that the artist has designed a man and a woman as the two disciples. A lot of times artists depict both of the disciples on the road to Emmaus as men, but I think there's really strong reason to believe that this was actually a couple, Clopas and Mary of Clopas, with Jesus there in the middle talking to them. And so I think that if Bauckham's historical reconstruction is correct, then we have another very important leading lady of the Word, Mary of Clopas, who would have served as someone very knowledgeable about the life of Jesus, and someone who, of course, saw the resurrected Jesus, and someone who had conversation with the resurrected Jesus. So she would have been a great resource for the early church, and I'm sure somebody that people went to for an authoritative take on the life of Christ. And so Mary of Clopas, another important leading lady of the Word.